I completely failed to think about the burden that I would be for her. Some of the values that were a big part of our Indie Core experience was the concept of simple living, concept of community immersion. And what that meant was just being mindful of how people in our communities lived and trying to match that, trying to not be extravagant, trying not to call attention to the fact that we were from America, trying not to use opportunities to leave the community and go to the cities, to try and stay and immerse ourselves into the family life, into our work as much as possible. I lived in a large village called Goregaon in rural Maharashtra, and I would travel to smaller rural villages. The villages I traveled to, they were remote, they lacked electricity and running water, no plumbing, and once in a while I would have to stay overnight for a project-related reason. On one occasion when I was planning an overnight visit, multiple women offered to let me stay with them. And I was certainly tempted to stay with a family that had a larger and relatively more comfortable home, but I chose to stay with a single mother who had 3 daughters and was among the poorest families in her village. I felt that staying with her was more in line with the principles of simple living and community immersion that Indie Core advocated. I thought it would also just mean a lot to her that I chose to stay with her over some of her wealthier peers. But I completely failed to think about the burden that I would be for her. I arrived around dinner time, empty-handed, and I noticed that she had purchased fresh vegetables for dinner. I knew immediately that this was way more than she could afford. She ate probably potatoes and onions for most meals, like most people in her community. And I was mortified that I didn't come bearing, fresh vegetables, fruits, and chocolates, goodies for her and her family. Here I was thinking that I was doing something good. But in reality, that meal for me probably came at the expense of multiple meals for her daughters. I have a daughter now, and I can only imagine the weight of her choice. I still harbor guilt for not being more mindful of her situation and more proactive about how I could have helped. Here she was being so generous for me, and I hadn't thought about how I could be generous to her. I wish I'd realized that while there are times where it makes sense to live simply and in a manner that matches other people in the community, there were also instances where it was okay to call attention to the fact that my circumstances and resources were different than those of the people around me, especially if I had an opportunity to be generous.